Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode number 58 of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com, author of the book Discover Chocolate. And today we're going to be talking about, I think, one of the most complex, perhaps most controversial subjects in all of chocolate. And that has to do with roasting. So before we get on to the topic, what I'd like to do is welcome everyone here, of course, and to ask everybody to go into the comments, the live chat, and let me know where you're connecting from today. Not only who you are, your name, but where in the world you are, so that I can do a quick shout out. We can get a sense for where the community is connecting in today. Also, at any point during the course of the hour, go into the chat, go into the comments, ask a question, and I'll get your questions answered up on screen and answered during the course of the hour. So want to start off by showing you, here is TheChocolateLife.com right now. This is the live website. And to remind everyone that for every single one of these live streams, I do create a post. So right now the post is here in the top rail. The current live stream is always in the top rail. And there is a calendar of all previous posts. So if you go into the calendar, you'll find the scheduled live streams, then you'll find the archive of live streams. And if what you want to do, you can go straight to the YouTube playlist for all of the live streams. And here are all 58 of the live streams. You can go and watch them. So please, and while you're there, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And go like the individual videos. If you're watching on LinkedIn or Facebook, like and share with your friends. Let's do what it is that we can to grow the community. So I'd like to say hello to Tyler, who's connecting from upstate New York, from Syracuse, Cacauitos. So this is Cesar Aguiar, originally from Colombia, but is now living up in Toronto. And then to Mark and Yuri, who are connecting from Denver, Colorado. And you know what? I'm looking forward to the episode as well. And so I am going to jump right into it. Now, I just noticed there's a difference in the way these images render between Chrome and Safari. So you can't see the face of the woman who is in this picture. I actually don't recall her first name. I haven't seen her in person since 2010, but I made a number of trips between 2007 and 2010 down to the area of Punta Gorda in the Toledo district of southern Belize, and had a chance to visit with a farmer by the name of Eladio Pop and his family as a part of the work that I did. And after we went to the farm, we went to the family house where they always treated us to this fabulous meal. And once we were there, in addition to treating us to the meal, we got a chance to see Mrs. Pop roasting cocoa beans on a comal, which is either a ceramic or steel plate, which is over a fire. And here what it is you're looking at is Mrs. Pop swirling around the cocoa beans on top of this brutally hot comal. They're also toasting a tortilla at the same time. But this represents the most traditional way to roast cocoa beans. Put them in some sort of vessel over a wooden fire and toast until they're done. Now, this, as it turns out, is one of the primary reasons where chocolate from that part of the world is the way it is. So number one is that if you want to make a chocolate product, you need to keep it from melting. So if you're working on a metate, you're going to be refining the chocolate. It's going to stay very coarse. Originally, there was no sugar. They would have had a little bit of honey, but there was no sugar originally. And so they would have tried to do something that would stay more or less unmelted at above the temperature melting point of cocoa butter. And so the product was formulated so that it would have those characteristics. But as you might imagine, looking at this particular roasting method, there's not a whole lot of nuance or control either over the heat or the time. And so the cocoa beans are basically roasted and what we would consider to be over roasted. The beans may or may not have been fermented, probably not in this case. They're for the household personal consumption. They would not have been for sale, so they wouldn't have wanted to invest the time and energy, the labor, so the money associated with labor to do the fermentation. So probably just dried, maybe washed before drying. And so what they're looking for here is just a straightforward chocolate flavor, maybe with some nuts as well. It's very, very common in these typical chocolates from Mesoamerica and Central America and in Mexico, which is technically a part of North America. But this represented the pinnacle of roasting technology in cocoa for the first several thousand years, in which cocoa was being transformed. Cocoa beans were transformed into something that would be eaten. And I want to say hello to Teresa from Roswell, Georgia. Thanks, Teresa, for joining us today, and also everyone at Encore Coffee in Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas City, Kansas. Thanks for joining us all today. Because it has been an issue in the past, what I wanted to do was remind everybody that if you want to find the Chocolate Life live streams, the information on how to find them either at YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook are scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. And with all that out of the way, let me go back into the comments so I can see when they come up. I'm going to start off with what might be an interesting place to start, because when we talk about when I think about roasting cocoa beans, the most important thing is in fact the cocoa bean itself. And this is where everything starts. I mean, the cocoa bean is what is going to be transformed in the roasting process. And so, let's think a little bit about the bean itself. So the bean comes in many different sizes. And the grading standard has to do with the number of beans in 100 grams of cocoa. And the industry standard is around 100 beans per 100 grams. So on average, every bean wants to be 1 gram. And it turns out that in industrial chocolate making facilities, pretty much all the machinery is built around this rough size. And so when you have a bean which runs much smaller, so maybe 140 to 150 beans per 100 grams, and that would be typical of something like the cacao silvestre from Bolivia, it's really difficult to process, right? Because the machinery is not designed to handle beans that small. And then you could have much larger beans. CCN 51 are often, in the 70 to 80 beans per 100 grams. And again, the machinery is not designed to handle them well. One of the reasons why this is important is we have to talk about yield, which is what percentage of this bean is going to be usable after I roast it, which means I'm removing 6 to 7% of weight by water. And then what is the ratio of shell to the nib inside? So the smaller the bean is, the higher of the ratio of shell to the nib inside and the lower the yield. The larger the bean, right, the smaller the ratio of shell to usable nib, and therefore the higher the yield will be. And if you're an industrial chocolate maker, you want to maximize yield to the extent possible. So you want to optimize the size of the bean to the size of the machinery to be able to make sure that you're having the minimal amount of loss through the entire, especially roasting, cracking, and winnowing processes. That is a really, really important goal. I think for a small chocolate maker, we are concerned with yield, but yield is also a function of how much time we spend in the cleaning process. So if I'm a big industrial chocolate maker, I'm not hand picking over every single bean. I'm not looking to make sure that there's no hole in it. I'm not looking to make sure that there's no visible cracks or other kinds of defects. An industrial chocolate maker, they're looking to get rid of, in their cleaning and destoning process, they're looking to get rid of stones, obviously, but sticks and twigs, things that might burn. So little bits of jute from the bags, for example, or leaves that might be in the pile. Sometimes because the farmers get paid by weight, there might be nails in the pile. And that's one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you have a magnetic trap. So if there are ferrous objects, they can be pulled out of the beans when you are when you're cleaning them, and you want to think about it sort of you want it as automatic as possible. And right, FDA requirements suggest that you should have if you're here in the United States, you actually do need to have a magnetic trap as part of your bean cleaning process. So the bean is really, really important just from just a physical perspective. But what we need to do also is consider the variety of bean. So are we talking about just broadly, is it, what percentage is going to be Criollo genetics? What percentage is going to be Forastero genetics? If it is a cross between Forastero and Criollos or Trinitario, what is the genetic makeup? And that is going to put limits or boundaries around the chemicals that are in the bean. Because in the end, right, what it is that we're doing is we're taking the chemicals that exist in the fresh bean, fresh seed. It's not a bean yet. When it's fresh, it's a seed. We're taking the chemicals that are in the seed and we're transforming the chemicals in the seed during fermentation into other chemicals. And the fermentation process breaks down, for example, complex proteins into simpler amino acids and complex sugars into simpler starches. And these simpler chemical building blocks are more available in the roasting process to be able to create the flavor and aroma chemicals that we're looking for in the final chocolate. So genetics and the fermentation are really, really important to understand, because we're going to make the decisions about how to roast this bean based upon the genetics and the flavor precursor chemicals that are in the bean, which are going to determine what kind of flavors we're going to be able to get out of it at the other end of the process. So the place we start is we start with an understanding of what the chemistry of the bean is, so, and what it is capable of. So we know, for example, or we think we know, from example, that if I have an Amelonado Forastero, originally from the state of Pará in Brazil, but now grown in West Africa, there will be differences between Ghanaian Amelonado and Ivorian Amelonado and Cameroonian Amelonado, for example. But for the most part, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be delivering a baseline chocolate flavor. If you do have an Amelonado and there is some cross with some other genetics, there is some specialized fermentation, you will be able to get other flavors out of it. For the most part, people are looking at West African Forasteros for that baseline chocolate flavor. Whereas if you come over to the Americas and you're looking for more complex genetics, you're looking for things which are going to deliver fruit and flowers, nuts if you're in Venezuela, and other kinds of flavors and aromas. But that all exists in the bean. And the health of the tree, the health of the soil that the tree is growing in, how the tree is pruned, all of the things related to agricultural processes on the farm will influence the potential which is represented by the genetics of the tree. Then you have the post-harvest processing, fermentation, and drying, and then you can steer the flavor into very different ways, which means you can change the precursor chemicals that are in the seed as it's fermented and dried into a set of chemicals that, when roasted, you can arrive at a particular set of flavors. So as craft chocolate makers, as I talked about in the recent episode on defining what craft, what we're looking to do is we're looking to maximize the expression of flavor from the bean, right? And so that's where it is that we need to start understanding that the bean represents potential. All right. Before I jump on, I want to say hello to Yado, from Australia. Hey, I've visited Australia. I have family who was there, and looking forward to your I noticed you've got another question there, and I will ask that over the course of the next hour. But yeah, no, I've got family from Australia. I've visited there a couple of times, mainly on the east. But have really fabulous memories of being in Geelong and Anglesey, as well as Melbourne and Sydney. Brisbane many years ago. So it's a fabulous country, growing cocoa up in the Northern Territory, and there's some fabulous chocolate makers in the country. So I'm glad to have you in the room today. All right. So having said all of that stuff as, oh, you're in far north Queensland. Fabulous. Having said all that about the bean, what I want to do is I want to talk very specifically about how do you decide how to roast this? What time and what temperature? So it's a mystery, right? And this is the first place that you as a chocolate maker, you get to have your hand, unless you're on the farm, that you have a hand, you get to have a hand in determining what the flavor is going to be. The sort of conventional wisdom, if I can, is to put them in the roaster, pick a temperature. That temperature is one usually which is arrived at by individual experience with a particular roasting technology that you might have, and then let it go until you can start smelling something, right? And the way that the aroma evolves will tell you something about what's going on inside the bean. You can evaluate the bean over the course of time, and then what you can do is you can eventually arrive on a time and temperature combination which seems to represent a compromise to be able to deliver you the kind of flavor that you're looking for in the finished chocolate. I had a conversation many years ago with Ed Seguin, who is one of the people who is involved in the running of Cocoa of Excellence. And he said, basically, if you can smell it, it's no longer in the bean, right? And so that caused me to reevaluate how I was thinking about roasting of cocoa beans. But let's go right now to Cocoa of Excellence. So this link is not in the post on the Chocolate Life at the moment. I will put a link to one of these pages in the Chocolate Life post for today. And what I'm going to suggest to you is you go take a look at these, and they will give you a reference from which you might start. So the Cocoa of Excellence has been around now since 2009 or thereabouts. They've processed, hundreds, if not thousands, of samples of beans. And the people who do that work have, hundreds of years combined experience in making chocolate. And what they have done is they have developed a protocol for roasting the beans, right? And you can find out what the protocol is, right, from looking at the awards results to some extent. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this first one, which won gold in African Indian Ocean as the region, right? And what we can do is we can say, again, Madagascar, and we could click on the View Details link, right? And what we will see is a whole bunch of detail, but they will give you, let me see if what I can do is zoom in a bit. What they'll do is they'll give you the dominating genetics, right? Which in case of Forastero, what the locals call it. So this appears to be a hybrid of Forastero and Criollo genetics. It is a Trinitario. It'll give you an idea of bean size and moisture content, average bean weight, cocoa butter content, all these kind of things. But what you'll do is you'll say, here is roasting temperature and roasting time, right? So 116 degrees centigrade for 26 minutes for an average bean weighing 1.35 grams of a Madagascar. Now, your particular bean, if it's from Madagascar, might have different genetics, might have different characteristics. It's going to be in different soil, will have different fermentation. So it's not going to deliver you these exact flavor characteristics. But what you might do, and I'm suggesting that you might do, is that you might want to start out, right, using these characteristics as the starting point, or these technical characteristics at the starting point, looking for these roasting temperatures and these roasting times for these genetics. So if we go to another gold winner, let's go to Togo's in Africa. Let's find Central America. Let's just go to a different region. Let's look at Guatemala and scroll up a little bit, and we'll see Trinitarios, bean sizes, but 116 degrees centigrade for 24 minutes. Right? Now, what's maybe interesting for everybody to know here is the kind of oven that they're using to do this. And these are done in very, very special lab ovens, which are in fact deck ovens. Right, so they're not open tray. Oh, they may be open tray ovens, but they are in fact regular ovens. I don't even. I think they actually may be convection style ovens as well, but they are lab ovens, which are designed to keep the temperature at a very, within a very, very specific range, like within a fraction of 1 degree centigrade, over an extended period of time. Right, and the reason why they use these ovens is in fact that precision. Right, they know that they can put the beans in there. They know what the recovery time of the oven is going to be. So when I open the door and put a tray of beans in and I close the door again, how does the temperature of the oven quench? How far does it drop? And then how fast does it recover? These are all characteristics of the ovens that are very, very well known. And so they have a degree of repeatability. Most importantly is that I can have an oven in France and an oven in the United States and an oven in Germany and an oven somewhere else, and they'll all work the same. Right, and that's one of the reasons why they use these ovens. They're very expensive, but they're specifically used for these characteristics. But they do use ovens. They don't use drum roasters. I just want to be very, very clear about that. And these are actually, the chocolates are made, I believe, in small melangers as well. It's also important that what they're doing, what they're doing is they're looking at the transformation of the cocoa bean into liquor and the liquor into chocolate. They're not evaluating the cocoa bean on its own. We can taste the cocoa bean and we can think about, do we get any defects? All right, so are we getting any musty or moldy flavors? Are we getting maybe some metallic flavors? We can see, is it in fact well fermented or not? These are things we can do from tasting the bean, but that doesn't necessarily let us know what the chocolate is going to taste like. And this is one of my challenges with the cocoa grading protocol, for example, that the FCCI does, is you need to make that leap from the bean, right, into what the chocolate made with the bean will be like, right? And you can do the grading of the cocoa beans as much as you want. I think it's a really fabulous skill to have. But I would suggest that in order to be able to be really sure about what the bean is going to be able to deliver, that what you're going to need to do is you're going to convert it into chocolate. And because I think the Cocoa of Excellence protocol is the most complete, it's the most rigorous, it has probably the most background history about it, and much of the information about it is publicly available. What you can do is you can say, oh, I have beans from this part of the world. Let's say I have beans from the Asia Pacific. I don't know if there are any Australian beans that won this year, but I got some beans from the Philippines, the bunch of gold winners from the Philippines this year. And what I can do is I can say, my beans come from this area. And here is the Cocoa of Excellence protocol for handling the beans. In this particular case, 119 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. And this would be a good starting time, right? A good place to begin, right? For what you're doing. It may seem counterintuitive, right, to work this way, but when you're just starting out, or if you're just starting out as a chocolate maker, number one, or you're working with a bean for the first time, having a starting point, right, is a wonderful place, as a wonderful thing to have. And this database, I think, is probably one of the best resources that a chocolate maker can have in terms of, right, the beans that they're working with. The other thing is that for every single one of these chocolates, there is a recipe, right? For the most part, they always use it's, they're always 61% and 5% cocoa butter. They always use deodorized cocoa butter. They're very clear about using a very clean deodorized cocoa butter because they don't want any flavor of aroma for the cocoa butter to influence the chocolate. When they do use the cane sugar that they're using, they make sure that it is a very, very special, basically odorless sugar. There are grades of sugar. They work with a specific grade of sugar to make sure that the sugar isn't imparting any flavor in it as a part of their evaluation. And so that's also really important. If you're making a chocolate, you need to, and you're adding sugar, you need to recognize that if you're using, for example, an unrefined cane sugar or a refined cane sugar, or you're using a beet sugar as opposed to a coconut sugar, which is a very, very dominant flavor to it, that the flavor of the sugar that you're going to use is going to have an influence on the flavor of the finished chocolate. And that might mean that you want to change the way you roast in order to be able to arrive at a particular desired flavor category. And then what they'll do is they'll finally do, a ratio of nibs to sugar and, total cocoa content. So you'll have recipes here, right? Which are also a great place to start using these cocoa beans. I mean, it's just, I can't accentuate enough just how important it is to have these resources. So what I'm going to recommend that you do, again, I'll put the link to this page of the winners in today's live stream. And what I recommend that you do is you go take a look at these and download as much information as you can from these and store it and have it locally. So I want to, before I go on to the next part of this, what I want to do is get a couple of questions out the way. So Yado, raw as opposed to roasting, I don't necessarily know that I understand your question here, right? So if you want to, come back in here and let me know what you're thinking about, I'll happy to answer it directly. But what I want to do on the raw, I'll jump into this raw question really, really quickly, is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding about roasting and raw, and it has to do with the physics of heat transfer. If I were to subject this cocoa bean to a temperature of 150 degrees centigrade, right, for 1 minute, right, chances are, if I were to remove the paper shell, that the surface of the cocoa bean itself would not have exceeded the upper bounds of raw, which is what, 48.7, 117, 118 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a good chance that it will not have done that, right? So there's no reason not to use high temperatures to be able to sanitize your beans, right? To be able to do what is called a microbial kill step. You just need to think about the fact that, it takes time for the heat of the roasting process to penetrate the seed or to penetrate the shell and get into the bean inside. So be careful about that. And even if I go another couple of minutes, I mean, I've basically, heated up the outside 2 or 3 microns, right? So have I killed the entire cocoa bean by subjecting it to a temperature of 150 degrees centigrade for 2 minutes? The answer is absolutely not. I haven't. So think about that. There's no reason to not think about food safety. So salmonella and E. coli contamination, aflatoxin, ochratoxin, those kinds of things when you're working with raw cocoa. So hopefully that answers that question. So Yado says, taste-wise differences. So if you don't roast the cocoa bean, what you're not doing is you're not transforming the flavor precursor chemicals that are in the beans into other flavors. So you are going to get a basic chocolate flavor, but that chocolate flavor will be overlaid with earthiness, right? And it will be, for the most part, quite bottomy. So it'll be rich and bottom with a little bit of chocolate flavor. All of the, real deep, rich chocolate flavors, all of the other flavors, fruit and flowers, things that we like in chocolate, there's no time to develop them, right? It is, in fact, the roasting process that converts all these simple sugars and simple amino acids and other simple compounds through Maillard reactions in part, but other chemical reactions in roasting that are really, really what it is that roasting is all about. So you are going to get a basic chocolate flavor. It's likely to be muted. It's likely to be earthy, right? But it's not going to be as forward as it would be as if you roasted it, and it's not going to be as complex. You probably won't have nuances of flavor that change over time, for example. So it's going to be a relatively simpler flavor profile. So Yara, I hope that answers the question you're asking. So Cesar says, what type of roaster are you referring to? Home convection, bake oven, coke? All right, so, right. Cesar, that is in fact the place that I'm going next, right? I think when most of us start out roasting, at least this is where I was, started out when I was first giving classes, I used my home convection oven. I put the beans on a sheet pan. I didn't have any perforated sheet pans at the time, so they were just regular sheet pans. And I put them in the oven, and I waited until they smelled like brownies, right? And that smell had to come through the exhaust air of the oven and through the door, right? And so I put it at temperature. I usually started somewhere at 110, 120 degrees centigrade, and just put a time on it. Just I come back in 20 minutes and then start checking, right? I think many of us, the first roaster we ever get is something like this Be-More roaster. So it is, in fact, a roaster which was originally developed for coffee. It is basically a small toaster oven, right? With some ceramic heating elements or nichrome heating elements surrounding this rotisserie drum. And we put the coffee beans or the cocoa beans in this drum, put it inside the oven, and we get it going. We set a temperature, we set a time, and the roasting process is upon us. There are a couple of characteristics of an oven that you want to look for, and this is irrespective of the technology of the oven involved. So, with something like the Be-More, which is relatively small, so under a kilogram usually of beans in terms of an individual roasting cycle. You'll probably get more coffee in this than you will cocoa. One of the challenges that you face is that the oven cavity is very, very small. And the quantity of beans that you're putting into the oven is very large relative to the size of the oven cavity. You also have the fact that even though the heating elements are designed to get to coffee temperatures, which are much, much higher than they are for cocoa, right? In fact, they're not all that strong, right? And it takes a while for the oven to heat up to the right temperature. And then when you open the oven and you put the beans in and you close the oven, the temperature has gone down significantly, and the thermal mass of the beans in the drum is high enough. So the inertia, the thermal inertia of the beans is high enough so that it takes a while for the beans to come, the mass to come up to temperature, right? And every time you move from one size oven to another size oven, for example, right, that you change this ratio of how much heat can I put into the oven at any given time? What is the quench? How far down does the temperature drop? How long does it take to recover, right? So that is the recovery time. So we have this complex set of characteristics. And that's one of the reasons why a roasting profile that you generate in a Be-More oven, something that's very small like this, Be-More oven, or a small oven like this one from Cocoa Town. By the way, I have no commercial association with Cocoa Town. These are just resources that I was looking for. This is basically a toaster oven, right? And what they've done is they've put a rotisserie drum inside a toaster oven, right? And it's better in some respects than the Be-More. And one of the reasons why it is better is that the elements overall are more powerful. right? And number two, you can get more cocoa in the body of the oven, in the body of the drum. However, you do have the fact that you still have this thermal mass issue, that I've got more beans and I'm putting more beans into an oven, and I still have to calculate how long, how much the temperature is going to drop when I open up the door, right? And the longer I wait before I put the beans in, the lower it will drop than the recovery time, which is associated with closing the door, and how much heat can be applied. This is not a knock on any particular oven. I was in the Pralou factory in France in, I want to say, 2009, and was gifted with the opportunity to go into the back of the factory and see the entire chocolate making process, which is something they don't let many people do. But they had a 35 kilo gas powered roaster, and they would put cocoa beans into the roaster, and it would be at the temperature they wanted it, 120, 130, whatever it was. And they'd put 35 kilos of beans into this roaster, and the temperature would drop by 40 or 50 degrees centigrade, right? And you could hear the fire, just really, all the burners on full while the roaster is trying. And this is a conventional drum roaster. I don't remember the brand, but this is an issue that every kind of roasting technology has. And so any batch roasting technology has. You need to be very, very careful about understanding the characteristics of your oven. And this is one of the challenges when going from a small oven like this Bmore to a larger oven, right? Same basic approach, right? An oven with a rotisserie drum inside of it, to even a much larger one. So this is an oven, a rotisserie oven from a company called Vollrath Cayenne. People may remember a company called Bottom Line Technology. Bottom Line Technology uses a similar kind of oven. One of the great things about having a larger oven like this is, number one, I believe this one has a sampling port on the side. So what you can do is you can pull beans out of the mass of beans during the roasting, so you can actually do some sampling of the beans during roasters. So absolutely what we want to be able to do, absolutely something we want to be able to do as we're doing this. And I believe there's also actually there may be a second thermocouple in this. I know there is in the Bottom Line Technologies. I'm not certain if one is there. Perhaps if Teresa can let me know if you're still watching, if there's a second thermocouple in here. So you want something that is telling you the temperature of the air in the drum, and that temperature of the air in the drum is different from the temperature of the beans, right? And this is one of the things that happens as you start paying more money for the roasting technology that you're using, is you have an opportunity to be able to get more information about what it is that's going on. Now, if I'm looking at the little Bmore, all I know is the temperature of the air. I don't know anything about the temperature of the inside of the mass of the beans. I believe that in the small roaster, I don't know if there's a second thermocouple or not. Anyway, so you want to be able, I'm sitting here, I'm distracted because I'm reading to try to find the answer to that question. I'm sorry, it didn't occur to me to read this for that particular bit of information before I started. Right? But that's one of the things that you get as you start looking towards more expensive roasters, right? There's another really, really important aspect, right, of using any kind of roasting technology. And this is something that I learned, when I was doing an installation for an FBM customer in Western Canada in February. And I was out there doing the install. All the equipment is there. They had a really, really fabulous two roasters. They had a small sample roaster, gas powered, about 2 kilos. And then they had a full size coffee roaster, I think 35 or 50 kilos. And we had some beans that we left out on a sorting table overnight. So it was a steel table on a concrete floor in the middle of a Canadian winter. And what we realized the next morning, because we're having fun and playing around, is I put a thermometer in the middle of the pile of beans that had been sitting on the table overnight. and the temperature of that pile of beans was on the order of like 10 degrees centigrade, right? And what you want to do when you think about your roasting profiles is you want to make sure that your cocoa beans always start from the same temperature. So 5 kilos of beans at 10 degrees centigrade is going to have a very, very different roast profile from that same mass of beans at room temperature at 20 or 25 degrees centigrade, right? So be very, very careful about the temperature of the beans that the beans are at before you put them in the roaster. If you're not paying attention to it, you could have a roast profile, throw the beans in, and they will come out raw, right? If they're much colder than you think they are. So very, very important to understand the physical characteristics of the oven, its recovery time, but then also what the temperature of the beans themselves will do to the quench and the recovery time, because it makes a huge difference if you're not careful. So Tyler, who's connected from upstate New York, so the Beemore can roast 2 pounds of cocoa at a time, so roughly a kilo. And there's an easy retrofit to add a thermometer to record the temperature in the bean mass. Great. So that makes it more usable, sort of as a lab test roaster, right? Because what you can do is you can, rather than focusing just on the temperature of the oven, what you can do is you can focus on the temperature of the mass of cocoa beans, which is what you really want to know. You really don't care that the oven is 120 degrees centigrade. What you care is that the temperature in the mass of beans gets to a certain point, whether it's 110 or 115 or 120. And so having a thermometer in the mass of beans is really, really important. And if then what you have is a way of connecting that thermocouple, usually via USB, into a computer, most often people are using a bit of software for coffee roaster called Artisan. You can actually keep track of the temperature of the beans as during the roast. And so you can see and look how the temperature changes over time. And that is really, really valuable to be able to do. Now, the next step for that would be able to have a PLC, so have a computer on the roaster, and you could actually use feedback from the computer to control the heaters in the roaster to make sure that you hit a particular curve. So this curve of how long does it take to get from, the beans when they start, when you just enter them, to get to a certain temperature, right? If you have a computer-controlled roaster, what you can do is you can control that curve and make sure it's consistent from roast to roast, right? And then you can make sure that you could keep it at a particular temperature more consistently over time. And so the real question is, it's more technical, it's more technified. Is it still craft? I absolutely, yes, you're in there, you're the one who's making the decisions. But what I would recommend that you do is be very, very careful about the notion of evaluating cocoa beans while they're hot, right? So as we all know from cooking, that if we're immersed in an aroma for any length of time, what will happen is that our noses will become less sensitive to it. So if you've been roasting cocoa for a couple of hours, you'll become less sensitive to that aroma. So if you take a sample out and you smell it, right, your smell is compromised at this point. You cannot make a considered evaluation right at that point. The same thing is true of temperature. If you taste the cocoa bean while it is hot, while it is warm, right, it will give you a very, very different expression of flavor than if it is at room temperature. And so what you really want to do is you really want to let the temperature of the bean come down to room temperature before you evaluate it, right? Because that's the temperature at which you're going to eat the chocolate as well, right? So that's going to give you a much better expression than if the bean is warm. And we know this from bread. We know this from almost anything, that our perception of the flavor is going to change based on the temperature. It's much harder to get a particular flavor profile, for example, out of something which is ice cold or frozen than it is from something which is at room temperature. So be careful about those kinds of things. What I want to do very, very quickly is jump over to a combi oven. So some people say, hey, combi ovens or convection ovens are not really roasters. And what is the definition of roasting? It's just applying heat, right? So it's not a drum roaster. That's certainly true. So these machines have very, very different characteristics. There are a couple of things that you can do. Many of these ovens actually do come with thermocouples, and so you can put a probe inside the mass of beans, do that, and it'll tell you what's going on. The other thing you want to do is, if you're using an oven like this, is use air fryer baskets. Don't use sheet pans, right? The air fryer baskets are open on the bottom. The air will get into and between the beans on a much more regular and consistent basis, and you'll have more consistent, faster cooking if you use air fryer baskets. The other thing you want to do when you want to use a combi oven, and this is why I recommend a combi oven, is combi ovens have steam. And so during the initial minutes of the roasting process, what you can do is you can get the humidity of the cavity up to 100%. And if you're above 100 degrees centigrade, so you're in positive pressure there, the steam is above the boiling point, what you'll do is you have a very effective microbial kill step. So if there is Salmonella, E. coli, aflatoxins, anything on the exterior surface of the bean, you are much likely to kill it in a shorter period of time in a humid environment, right, than you are in a dry environment. So another thing to consider when using these things. The other reason to use these, and I know I have personally spoken with people who use these, one of whom is Brian Graham at Fruition. He has last time I looked, he had a 6-pan Unox. Same brand, but I think different model, is that, and I spoke about this with Case Rad at Metropolitan Deli in Amsterdam, is that once you've dialed in the roasting profile for any particular bean, and it's going to be different than it is for a drum roaster, once you do dial in that profile, you can basically fill the oven. And it doesn't matter whether you put 1 pan of beans in or 8, or 1 pan, or you fill every rack with pans. You're going to have a consistent roast. That's another thing about these ovens. Really, really fast recovery times. They are designed to circulate air evenly and massively throughout the cavity during the roast process. But you can basically hit a programmed roast cycle, and you can say, get it to this time and temperature, hold it there, bring it down. So it's like the artisan control software is built into the oven, right? And you can just walk away and wait till the oven beeps at you, right? And you'll know that the roast is done when the oven beeps at you. It means that you're not watching and paying attention, and your attention is free to do other things at the time. But if you are going to roast in a convection oven, get a combi oven. Make sure you have the ability to raise the humidity so you can do this microbial kill step. The other reason I really, really like ovens, especially if you are a small chocolate maker, is that you can bake in these puppies. You can probably make more money selling your chocolate in brownies than you can in chocolate bars, right? And so if you have to make a choice between having a small drum oven and a real oven, get a combi oven, right? And bake with it. You can roast nuts. You can dehydrate in these things. These things are fabulous when I think about making lots of complementary products with the chocolate that I'm making. They're not just devices for roasting beans. They're not, as Alton Brown would say, single taskers. So for me, if I'm very, very limited in terms of budget, very, very limited in terms of space, my choice is going to be towards a combi oven over all other options, just for that flexibility and the ability to generate multiple revenue streams from the space that I'm working in. So right. So Sar asked, besides sterilizing your humidity heat, is there any other benefit using combi ovens? I think I answered that question, right? Rather than thinking of yourself as a bean to bar chocolate maker, you're a chocolate maker. What can I make with the chocolate that I make, right? And so, yeah, cookies, brownies, many other kinds of slabbed bar products with chocolate in them. You're not always making bars. And anything that requires baking or dehydrating or concentrating in any kind of way, these things are fabulous. There is an option, I believe, for, if not these particular Unox ovens, but other combi ovens from other people, so you can turn them into smokers. So if you want to do a smoked chocolate, you can use these as smokers. And another thing is that if you're in a space where you have other people very, very near to you, then these things are very, very good at reducing the smells which go out. I mean, personally, I like the smell of roasting chocolate and baking or roasting cocoa. And it's something that I want, but it could be an issue if you're in tight quarters. Also, these things are less likely to, again, if you're in a very, very small quarters, these things are not going to heat the space up quite as much as most conventional roasters are going to be. An oven will do. And so if you have to do quick turnover, for example, between roasting and tempering in a very, very small place, having something like this is going to be a benefit in terms of throughput. I really like it. What I want to do is talk a little bit more. This is an Israeli company called Coffee Tech. They make a series of roasters from a small lab roaster all the way up to a 15-kilo roaster. They do fabulous coffee roasters. But one of the reasons why I wanted to mention them, and I'll put a link to them in today's post, is that they do have descriptions of the technology and features that are inside of them. So for example, in their coffee roasters, they use both conduction roasting, which is the heat inside the drum, and convection roasting, which is the airflow that goes through the drum. Now, along with the convection, they have blower speed control. And if you're a technical coffee roaster, you may know that the more air that you run through the drum, the sort of brighter and winier the flavor of the coffee is going to be. So if you're using a wet process Sumatran, you don't want to have a lot of air. You want to keep that low, bottom, right, sort of flavor with it. But if you're doing something like an Ethiopian where it's brighter, you might actually have a high airflow. So if you're a technical coffee roaster, you know these things. It's not something which is often considered when we're roasting cocoa. But if you want to be really, really technical about it, having the ability to be able to control the air flowing through the drum, it's a great thing to be able to do. So they have a built-in data logger, right? But they also have the ability to automate these on the larger ones, and then you've got a whole bunch of features. So this is a small tabletop, 240 volt, 50, 60 hertz tabletop roaster for cocoa. Not inexpensive, but if I was looking for a lab, if somebody said to me, "Hey Clay, you have all the space you need, you have all the budget you need," this is where I would start in terms of a lab roaster. One of the reasons why is because if I start moving up into a larger roaster, so this is their 15-kilo roaster, that I have a better sensibility of how the recipe is going to scale. So I'm much more likely that there's going to be a one-to-one relationship between what's going on in the small roaster and what's going on in the big roaster. But you can go take a look at, what is an indirect heating technology? What does it mean? Again, we have drum speed control. This is really important because if you're buying a coffee roaster, the drum for cocoa needs to be spinning slower. Otherwise, the beans will break. So just go take a look, and this is here just so you get an idea about how the coffee community thinks about their roasters and their technology and what it is that's available. Now, this could easily be a $45,000 roaster. I haven't looked at it recently, and so it's a really big ask in terms of what's going on. But if you're looking for automating the roasting, you want an all-in-one machine. This has got a chaff collector. It will have the equivalent of things to reduce CO2 and other emissions into the air. And I believe that I thought I was really, really surprised to see this, is that there is a destoner which is available for the machines. So if you want to get rid of stones and other things out of the cocoa beans, boom, the destoner comes as an option for the roaster, which I think is a very, very cool idea. So again, I'll put the link to this company. And again, I have no commercial relationship with Coffee Tech. I ran into them, probably 8-10 years ago, or at least, in my research on this, and have always been impressed by the way they describe the technologies that are available in their roasters. And so I'm putting this here so you can go, oh, cool. What is it? What is it that I might be looking for when I'm looking for a roaster? And what does the industry call these things, right? And what might I be looking for? I think is a really, 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 I think one of the better examples I've seen. So when you start looking at other roaster manufacturers, right? What are some, when you're looking to upgrade to a roaster, what are some of the things that you might be looking for? Or, what are the things I know are not in the roaster that they're offering to me. Plus, they're pretty. They're very, very nice looking. Yeah, if I was doing a small coffee shop and I wanted to roast in my coffee shop, something like this would be pretty cool. Or they make a 7-kilo roaster, right? Which is also, I think, pretty sexy. Not all technology is sexy looking. And that's sort of where it is that I wanted to go today, was to talk about the influence of the cocoa bean. This is what we're starting. This is what we're trying to do. We are, working to maximize the expression of the bean. So we need to start off from the bean, right? We need to understand it first. I also wanted to really hammer home the point that you want to evaluate the cocoa beans when they are at room temperature, not when they are warm, right? If you're in the room where things are roasting, you've been smelling the roasting cocoa for any period of time, your nose is unreliable, right? If you taste this cocoa bean when it is warm, right, you're not getting the same flavor release as if you're tasting it at room temperature, right? So make sure, right, that you're actually evaluating the roasted bean when everything is at room temperature, and ideally, when your nose has recovered from being sensitized to the aroma of roasting cocoa. And there's an approach to this in the last couple of minutes that I want to suggest that you do. And this is something which is especially appropriate or especially usable when you have a roaster with a sampling port. So during the roast process, what you can do is you can pull beans out and taste them, right? And what I want to suggest is that what you do is you build a graph, right? And across the top of the graph is 100 degrees centigrade, 105, 110, 115, 120, 125. So you just have a set of temperatures, right? And down the other side of the graph, you have times: 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 21 minutes, right? You can, again, if we have some sense, 15 minutes, 16 minutes, 17 minutes, 18 minutes, 19 minutes, 20 minutes, right? So you have a graph. And what you do is that for every temperature, right, you robotically pull the beans out at the time, right, that is on the graph. And you put the beans, only one or two, in the cell which is represented in the graph. And then what you do is you wait until all of the beans are at room temperature. Right? Then what you do is you evaluate the flavors, right, and of them. Again, you want to keep notes. You want to have a little notebook. And what you may do is you may find at a particular time, temperature and time combination, that what will happen is that there's an expression of a flavor that you like. But at the next temperature, higher temperature or lower temperature, that flavor expression is not there. Or at the next time, it's disappeared, right? Now, it might come back 2 minutes later or 3 minutes later, right? But that 2 or 3 minutes later may have introduced flavors that you don't like, right? And then if you do it at a different temperature, right, it will introduce flavors that you like just as much or more, right? Or that you like less, right? And so what you end up with a matrix and then you have highlighted cells in that matrix which represent flavor profiles that you like, right? Most people, when they roast, when they think about roasting, what they're doing is they're picking a time and temperature which represents a compromise, right? And this is the best compromise. So it's the least bad of all the possible flavors. This is a flavor I like, right? When you look at the matrix approach, what happens is you could say, ooh, I like this time and temperature, the flavor that's expressed here, and I like this time and temperature, the flavor that is expressed here. What happens if I blend those two together so that in the finished chocolate, I can have both of those flavors? That's a real cool idea. And so one of the reasons why I recommend, right, if you have a sample port, if you have to open up a convection oven, it's the door of a convection oven or the door of a rotisserie oven. It makes no sense to try to do this. That if you have a sample port, that you go and you use this approach. Just be robotic in terms of time and temperatures. Don't evaluate anything until everything is at room temperature, and then get this matrix, right? The primary reason is what you may do is you may find 2 or more times and temperatures that give you a flavor that you like. Now, you can decide to use those times and temperatures by themselves, right? You could decide to mix those times and temperatures to give you a chocolate which has got both of those flavors. And then you can change the ratio of the mixing, right, to determine how you want those flavors to be expressed in the finished chocolate. So that's really important. I think more interestingly enough is that what it says is, okay, when I get the next harvest of beans from this same supplier, I've got a couple of really good roast targets. I know that I should try it at this time and temperature, and I should try it at this time and temperature, right? And I've got an idea about what happens, right, if the time and temperature is different. So that when you're looking at creating roast profiles from the same beans, right, from different times of year, it could be a different bag, it could be from, again, a different harvest, you actually have some really, really good starting points to be able to work from, right? And that it helps you get, if you can, correlate this back, the chocolate tastes this way, the bean tastes this way, you correlate it back to what the bean might taste like raw, that you'll start, it's a great way to start developing a sense much more quickly of what the transformation process is going to be like from the raw bean to the cooked bean, and then from the cooked bean into the finished chocolate. So rather than sort of the more intuitive approach, which is just put in the oven until it smells nice, right? Which is the way I think many people start out learning. I mean, it is the way I associate with how John Nancy teaches roasting. I may be wrong. He may have changed this since the last time I had a chance to speak with him, or it was on the website. But in my opinion, this matrix approach provides you, the chocolate maker, with so much information, right, and gives you so many interesting kinds of capabilities in terms of increasing your expression of the flavors in the chocolate that you have. I mean, it could be that you find 3 or 4 different roast profiles, right? That when you blend these roast profiles together, you get something which is profoundly different than if you had to just pick one of them sort of in the middle, which was the least bad compromise from among all of them. And that is, I think, for me, that creative process, the putting my hand, in the creative process and thinking about how to maximize my ability to control the expression is what excites me about having a technical roaster, a technical approach to roaster, having a highly instrumented roaster, right? Having a roaster with a sample port, being able to connect the roaster to a computer, to be able to the computer control the roaster. I mean, all these kinds of things for me give me the sense that I am more in control of what it is that I'm doing. And rather than just putting things into an oven and pressing a button and making the decision based on what I'm smelling and what I might be tasting when the beans are warm. And so I invite you to try it and tell me what you think. And you may disagree with me totally. But I've used this approach in classes. I've taught it to some people, and in generally, something to consider. A couple of last comments before we close. Cesar, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed it today. John is currently offering a roasting seminar in November. Okay. I mean, from an education perspective, the more hands-on you can get, the more different approaches. So the important thing to understand is that John has an approach. I have an approach. We have our ideas. They're different from each other. And it's very much a case of YMMV. Your mileage may vary. You may find that his approach makes more sense to you. You may find that my approach may make more sense to you. I mean, if you do not have an instrumented roaster or a roaster with a sample port, you know, this matrix roasting idea that I presented is not something that's going to be useful for you, right? And so the question becomes, how do you go and develop the intuition, having less hard evidence, right? Which is what the matrix gives you. How do you go about developing the intuition, which is going to get you to the flavors in the finished chocolate that you want? So yeah. So final question, one more from Nabib. Hi, Clay, are you talking about the bean temperature or the roaster temperature? So in the end, what's important to know is the bean temperature, right? If all you have is the temperature of the air that the roaster tells you, wherever the thermostat is for the roaster, it's like an air conditioner, right? The thermostat for the thermostat which controls the air conditioner has got the thermometer right there, right? And so it's telling you the temperature in the room where the thermostat is, right? It's not telling you the temperature of the room across the room, right? And so if you have an oven, all right, just knowing what the temperature of the oven is very different from knowing what the temperature of the stuff in the oven. So, for example, if I'm doing a low and slow barbecue style cook, what I want to do is I want to put a thermometer in the brisket or a thermometer in whatever it is that I'm cooking, so that I know exactly what the temperature is at the center of what it is that I'm cooking, irrespective of what the temperature of the air is. So it's far more important to know what the temperature inside the mass of the beans is, right? And understand that, you know, one of the reasons why the roast is going to take 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it's going to take is we need the temperature at the center of the bean to reach a particular point without the outer side of the bean getting overcooked, right? So a very hot, short roast is going to give you a bean which is heavily cooked towards the outside and is undercooked towards the inside. So something to consider about that as well. Mark, I understand you're only offering options, not a recommendation. I don't follow John. I don't know what his seminar schedule is. If people want to reach out to Chocolate Alchemy and learn more, I recommend that you reach out to Chocolate Alchemy and learn more about it. Again, there's no such thing as too much education, right? The challenge that each of us has is to take what it is that we learn and fit it in to our workflow. How do we take that information and adopt it to the aesthetic that we have? You know, what are we trying to achieve as chocolate makers, right? And to be able to evaluate, not that this is the way to do it, it's a way to do it. And how do we make it our own and incorporate it into what it is that we're doing? But there's no such thing as too much education. And I think that going and taking classes classes that you pay for, not just sitting around a room and BSing with a bunch of other people abstractly, but sitting down with the equipment and seeing what is happening in real time, right? And doing the tasting evaluation and evaluating that with other people and hearing what they have to say at the same time is invaluable, right? And so one of the reasons why I'm going to be offering classes now that we can get back together again. Nabib, okay, so we talked about, all right, so let's go back here. So listen, these are great questions and I'm glad to answer them, and I've got a few more minutes and I'm happy to go. So also the top temperature is important, but the way it reaches it. So the answer is yes. right? It's not just, so if we think of, so we have a temperature curve. So let's say that what we do is we have a roasting time of 30 minutes. Let's just say we have a roasting time of 30 minutes. If the increase in temperature is quite slow, so let's say it takes 15 minutes for it to get to the temperature that we want in the mass of beans, not the oven, but the temperature in the mass of beans. If it takes 15 minutes, right, then the beans only spend 15 of the 30 minutes at that temperature, right? However, if the slope of the curve is much steeper and it goes to, we reach the desired temperature, let's say in 5 minutes, as opposed to 15 minutes, then the beans will spend a much higher percentage of the time in the zone that we're looking for, in the temperature zone that we're looking for. And so it does matter. So it really doesn't matter in the abstract how we get there. What matters is that we're consistent. So if one time we've got a 30-minute roasting profile and the flavor that I like is, oh, it takes me 15 minutes to get to temperature and it stays at that temperature for 15 minutes, right? Then if I do it again and it takes 20 minutes, or if I do it again and it takes 10 minutes, it'll be a different flavor, right? So what you want to do is you want that curve, how long it takes to get to temperature, to be consistent from roast to roast to roast. That's the important part. Whatever it is, whatever you decide the flavor is that you like at the end, that's the time and that's the temperature. How long it takes to get there is going to determine how long the beans spend at that temperature, right? And so if that curve is shallower, it takes longer, or steeper, it takes less time, it's going to affect what the final flavor of the beans is. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know. Yes, the rate of temperature increase. So absolutely what we're talking about. And finally, the question may be, do I employ a constant temperature versus a ramp from hot to target temperature? And the answer to that question is, yeah, that's a question. It's not the question. It is a question, right? But here is the point that I will make. If you don't have enough instruments in your roaster, you can't monitor this stuff, right? So you want to have at least one thermocouple in the mass of beans, in addition to whatever thermometer is being used to measure the temperature of the roaster. So that's the air or the drum surface, whatever it is that's being used to apply heat to things. You want to have at least those two, right? Once you have those two, what you can do is you can understand how changes, right, will affect. So I can keep the target temperature, right, of the roaster at a particular place, and then again find out how changes in the ramp time will affect the flavor. Now, some people say bring it up to a hot temperature, keep it there, then reduce it, right, for a particular amount of time. There are some, there are some people who say I like a reverse sear method on my steak. So I start off cooking it very, very low, making sure that it's evenly cooked to the desired temperature all the way through. And then what I do is I put it on a blazingly hot pan and give it the char very, very quickly on the outside of it. That's one way to cook. Or the other way to cook is, just to start out at a higher temperature, get the char that I'm looking for example, on a stovetop, right? I'm got my pan ripping hot. I put the steak in the pan, it's ripping hot. I got the char on it, and then finish it in the oven, right? So what happens is I can get the outside nice and crispy and crunchy, and let the heat slowly get through to the center of the steak, right? Your choice as to which is which. Equally good. Sometimes the results are very, very different depending upon what kind of char you like on the outside. Your choice, but that's if in the case of cocoa, you need instruments in whatever it is that you're roasting in order to be able to understand what's going on in the roaster. And then you need software, which will not only visualize that, show you what it is that's going on, but will record it, right? So that what you can do is you can overlay your current roast with a profile roast and understand how they are the same or different in order to be able to understand how changes in that roast profile are going to affect the finished flavor of the cocoa bean as chocolate. Because in the end, we really, unless you are selling the cocoa nibs, right? Or selling the cocoa beans somehow. What we care about is the flavor of the chocolate. We don't care about the flavor of the cocoa beans. Ultimately, we don't care about the flavor of the cocoa beans. We care about the chocolate, right? And so we need to keep that in mind, right? That the flavor of the cocoa beans is one thing. We need to find out how that flavor is expressed in the chocolate, right? So having a small melanger where you can do very, very quick evaluations of things is really, really important to do. So NABIB, absolutely, yes. A fluid bed roaster gets very different results than convection, trying to figure out what is more relevant. So there are lots of challenges with fluid bed roasters when it comes to cocoa. Normally, a fluid bed roaster has a flat bed of whatever it is you're roasting, and it blows air through it. With coffee, you have this notion of loft as moisture comes out of the coffee bean, the bean gets lighter, and it will start to loft, and you need to change the flow of air through the bed. So it's not a question of, is any of these technologies better than any other? It's just, how well do you understand the physics of heat transfer? How well do you understand how temperature of the inside of the bean changes over time? And if you change the way the heat is applied, right, how does that change that physical transfer of heat through the bean? So it could be a convection oven, again, it could be a more conventional gas or electric roaster. It could be, a convection oven. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just you need to spend the time understanding what the characteristics of heat transfer are of the particular roaster and roasting technology that you're using in order to be able to figure out, how do I get it to deliver to me the results that I'm looking for, right? So as a photographer, I have access to, when I was at school, Rhode Island School of Design, I had access to $2 plastic toy cameras, all the way up to multi-$1,000, very, very expensive twin lens reflex and 2¼ square large format Hasselblad 4x5 4x5 sheet film cameras. And in order to be able to use any of them, I needed to spend time understanding what their limitations were, as well as what their strengths were, right? And it's not a question of going from a 35 millimeter, one brand, Olympus to Canon to Nikon or something like that. For the most part, these are not going to make me a better photographer. They're just a set of tools, and I need to understand what the characteristics of these tools are, what their limits are, and do I take these limits as opportunities for creative expression, right? And I think that's interesting. Often we think, the tool is keeping me from doing something. Tool is not keeping you from doing something. You just need to understand how to get the best from it, right? And every single set of tool with a different set of characteristics is going to give you a different set of creative opportunities if you do the work of learning how they work. And that is the challenge. So it's not a question of fluid bed or convection or anything like that. NABIB, the rate from 100 to 110 is crucial, and also the blower's power. Again, depends on the technology that you're using. I would say for a fluid bed roaster, absolutely, very, very important. So they're more complex than max temperature and total time. Absolutely. I mean, I hadn't introduced the concept of fluid bed roasters in cocoa technology. There are a couple of fluid bed roasters that are used for cocoa. They tend to be repurposed from coffee. They're often smaller machines that are used in artisan coffee shops because they're small and they're fun to watch being used. They're less often used in cocoa for a bunch of different reasons. One of which is you manually need to watch the loft, right? So if the beans start popping around, you need to change the blower, right? And that's done manually. And so again, this is an example of the particular technology, how the technology used and how well you understand it in order to be able to use it, right? You need to know these things. You need to invest the time to understand what it is that's going on. And you can do it. Is the technology bad? No. Is it good? I mean, the technology is what the technology is. It's a tool. What matters is how you use the tool. And the more you know about the tool, the more you know about the tools that you're using, the better a job that you will do. The more you understand about the physics of heat transfer. Something simple like going back to the original conversation about raw, right, cocoa beans and roasting. Well, it takes a while for the heat to go through the shell. If I'm going to get rid of the shell, it doesn't matter if I subject the shell to 150 degrees centigrade for a minute, because that doesn't cook through to the center of the bean, right? The bean will still be, room temperature at the center. I haven't cooked the bean. I haven't killed it. I haven't destroyed all the enzymes, there are no living enzymes in dried cocoa beans, by the way. So I think it's a discussion which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, or at least an assertion that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay, so you're right, Selmy, Nabib, but you're talking about the Selmy roaster. So the Selmy is in fact a fluid bed roaster. I know that there are some people who are using it for cocoa, and I know more people who are using it for coffee. I don't have any personal experience using it for either of them, right? And so I can't speak to any specific, I can't speak to using the roaster from any particular personal experience. But you're absolutely right that a fluid bed, in this particular case, it's a closed chamber. And so the loft is not going to be as an issue with that. But you do, in terms of the beans popcorning all over the place, but you do need to change. You need to be aware of the temperature of the air and the speed of the air going through the bed, because it changes over time. And because it changes over time, and I think this is the interesting thing to think about, what happens is the characteristics of heat transfer through the fluid bed roaster change over time, right? So if I've got a convection oven like this, right, the beans are sitting in a pan, it's the air that's going on around them. The physics of the heat transfer don't change. The characteristics of the way the heat is transferred don't change over time. If I'm in an oven, if I'm in a roaster like this, right, and I'm looking at the beans inside the drum, right, I can change this by changing the airflow, but it is a manual thing. If I have the drum at a constant speed and I have the airflow at a constant speed, the physics of heat transfer, the way the heat is transferred into the bean, don't change that much over time. But when you've got a fluid bed roaster, right, as the beans lose moisture, the physics of heat transfer, because of the way the air is blown through the bed, change. And that's what you need to be very, very careful of. And it's one of the reasons why I think intuitively, again, I don't have a whole lot of personal experience using these roasters, that it could be a challenge. Listen, I mean, if there's a piece of Selmy equipment that I like the best, I think it is the roaster in their chocolate making line. I think the roaster is probably the most interesting and useful piece of equipment. Although I understand that it does require a particular bit of experience to learn how to use. And with that, I want to say thanks to everybody who've been with me on an extended Chocolate Life Live. We've been here for almost an hour and a half today. I will be following up with these questions in the comments on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I thank everybody who's been here for the entire hour and a half. The people who have done a thumbs up and a like and a share, please do go to YouTube and do a like the YouTube channel, The Chocolate Wire. If you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, follow my profile, join the Chocolate Life, and let other people know what it is that's going on. And if you want, you can become a member of the Chocolate Life. This is the only monetization that I do. There are no ads on the Chocolate Life. There's no Patreon. There's none of that other kind of stuff. There's always a free tier. You'll get newsletters and other kind of information from me on an irregular basis. But if you like what it is that I'm doing here on the Chocolate Life Live, you can also sign up for individual consulting. I can go and answer the questions for you. There's consulting which is built into the $150, $250, and $420 a year, which you can break down into monthly if you would prefer. This is the way I earn my living, and I appreciate the support that everybody gives to me that way. But until the end, I do want to remind everybody that it's Friday afternoon. We got a weekend. It looks like we've turned the corner from summer into early fall here in New York. It's been glorious here for the past couple of days. I'm looking forward to getting out and about this afternoon. I had a fabulous walk along the water this morning. I live very, very close to Sheepshead Bay and to the Coney Island Boardwalk. So being able to see the ocean and to see the bay as I'm out on a walk every morning is just a fabulous part of living in this part of New York City, looking out to getting to see the water during sunset this evening. I just love to be here. And I hope, where you are, you're having a lovely day as well. And to end today's live stream, as I do every live stream, if you're with a reminder, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So until this coming Tuesday, when we're going to be talking about what modern slavery is, what it means, have a great weekend, everybody, and ciao.